TA for this semester. She'll be doing the grading and she'll be helping with various things. Okay, we're back from our break now and we're going to do our second lecture for this evening, World Civilizations to 1500, before there was history. Okay, so we're going to look at the history before there were civilizations, before any history was written. Okay. Here's another picture of Cleopatra. I thought you might be interested in seeing again the reinterpretation of history and what Cleopatra looked like. I wanted to answer a couple of questions first. Some of you looked at the syllabus and you noticed that on the readings there are 3 abbreviations on your syllabus. On the lecture schedule, there's the textbook, and the textbook is listed according to questions, according to chapters. Okay, so I've listed the chapters you're supposed to read for that week. The second abbreviation is readings, RDGS. That means readings. That's the global experience. Okay, readings in world history. And those are listed by reading number, so that every reading has a number, and so you have a listing of each number. For example, reading number 21 is the Bhagavad Gita, and we'll be reading that for India. That's number 21. That's nothing to do with the page number. The page number is actually 75, but the reading number is 21. Okay? So under readings, you have reading numbers for the global experience. The same is true for the human record. If you'll notice on your syllabus, it says Hum Rec. That means the human record, sources of global history, and they're listed by reading number. For example, reading number 6 is the Zhou Book of Songs in Chinese history. Number 6 is the Book of Songs from the Zhou dynasty. Number 3 is 3 mortuary texts from Egypt. Okay, that's reading number 3. So it's listed according to reading number. Okay, so you can see the reading assignments. These are short readings. They're not very long, and your readings in the textbook, the chapters are short. But I want you to read the primary sources. That's the most important thing, and you can get your guidance from the lectures and the textbook. Okay, let's go to before there was history. One of the great achievements of modern man was the reconstruction of the past. The ancients had little comprehension of their own past, and we know more about early peoples than they knew about themselves. Our knowledge extends back before there were written records. And man learned to write only 5,000 years ago. But hominid or human beginnings were 5 million years ago. So that's all the history we're going to do today, that 5 million years before people learned how to read and write. Okay, only 5,000 years ago did people learn how to read and write. If you look at your handout, I have a chart that shows the history of the whole universe. It's not very, it's not according to scale, but you can see what a short period human beings have actually had written records. Okay, so let's look at the origins of man. The earth is in the universe like a speck of dust in the Pacific Ocean. The earth is 4.6 billion years old, and life began on earth 2.7 billion years ago as only a single cell. That's 500 million to 1 billion years earlier than was previously thought, according to the New York Times. And I'm citing the New York Times because that's what I read, but you can read The Economist and you can read the Houston Chronicle, and it's amazing what breakthroughs are being made in learning about these facts. And so just from reading the paper, you can find all these things out. So that the dates are being pushed back constantly for all of this early history. The life forms are single-celled creatures called eukaryotes, the first known cells to have nuclei and specialized internal structures for processing energy. And their present-day descendants are all the higher kingdoms of life, like plants, animals, and fungi, and this includes the single-celled animals like amoebae. This is based on new evidence found by a team in Australia, again, in 1999. The eukaryotes flowered into higher organisms 1.2 billion to 1 billion years ago. And living matter evolved naturally from non-living matter in a hierarchy of states of organization: electrons, protons, neutrons, atoms, and molecules. And the latest theory is that this was a kind of punctuated evolution, that this evolution went in spurts. It didn't happen in a slow and regular way, but there would be a sort of jerky jump forward and then a stasis for a while and then a jump forward after that. Organic matter had a hierarchical evolution from microorganisms to primitive plants to invertebrates to vertebrates. 300 million years ago, this became life on land, and it progressed from amphibians to reptiles to birds to mammals. For 60 million years, the mammals have been dominant. There's a new theory of the biological Big Bang that it happened in one big evolution. 60 million years ago, mammals have been dominant on the earth. And here is an alternate theory or a symbolic theory of the creation of the universe in the Big Bang theory. The New York Times in 2000 had an article of life's origins getting murkier and messier. The warm habitat deep in the ocean where life sprang from a community of primitive cells is the new theory. There's a new genetic analysis and new fossils that early life developed near a deep sea volcano vent and then diversified and spread. Instead of being a billion or so years growing, life popped up almost instantly, and microbes formed 3.2 billion years ago, heat-loving organisms near volcanic vents. There's also an article in the New York Times from 2000 saying maybe we are alone in the universe, that life is so miraculous that maybe it only happened once. Modern science is showing that Earth's composition and stability is exceedingly rare, and so it's infinitely more precious than we're actually treating it. Another theory is, expressed in the New York Times in 2002, this is only one of many universes, and this new theory envisions the cosmos splitting off into many parallel universes to explain dark energy. Yet another new theory, well, this is not that's a theory, but another new finding where the fossils found in China show that birds descended from dinosaurs. In other words, the dinosaurs did not disappear or go extinct, they turned into birds. And so this is a fact that's been clearly proven from the fossils, that dinosaurs turned into birds. And here is a chart of the different ages, the age of mammals, the age of reptiles, and the development of life on Earth. Man belongs to the animal kingdom, and they belong to the family called primates. The differentiation of human stock took place in the Pleistocene era. There were 6 or 7 glacial periods and 5 or 6 interglacial periods that meant relatively sudden environmental changes. And here let me go through some of these early reptiles and mammals. These are drawings, of course, of them. This is the age of mammals. Interestingly, the differentiation of human stock took place in the Pleistocene era, and there were 6 or 7 glacial periods and 5 or 6 interglacial periods that meant relatively sudden environmental changes. The survivors depended on intelligence and not brute strength. And so this meant adapting to new conditions and modifying these conditions. And this is the secret of man's unchallenged dominance, that he is able to adapt to his conditions. But man is not the only animal that adapts successfully to any kind of conditions that he encounters. Can you think of any other animals or beings that adapt wonderfully to their surroundings and that appear in almost all the environments of the whole earth? What?
Dogs.
Dogs, yes, dogs have adapted very well, but there are some other animals that have adapted even better than dogs. What?
Birds.
Birds have adapted. Yes, birds have adapted beautifully. There are birds all over the world, any more that you can think of that are notorious for adapting. Yeah.
Roaches?
Cockroaches. Cockroaches adapt wonderfully to. There are cockroaches in every single environment that there is. Yeah. Rats. Well, rats, no, actually rats did spread rather late. Actually, rats were European in origin. They originated in Norway, and the Norwegian rats have spread all over the world. But they didn't adapt throughout these thousands and millions of years. But cockroaches did, and mosquitoes. Mosquitoes adapted to every single environment. Dogs and rats are relative newcomers, but the cockroaches and the mosquitoes have been there a long time. When I first started lecturing many years ago, it was a given. People believed that men were the only people who had reason and intelligence and had any kind of ability to think and to be conscious of themselves. The latest studies are showing that many animals, and this is an extension of the theory of evolution, that men are evolved from animals and that many animals have the same kind of genetic constitution that we do, and something like 99% of their genes are the same as human beings. And there are some new studies, for example, of scientists who dare to say that animals think. Dr. Donald Griffith, who does cognitive ethnology, believes in animal consciousness, and he has studied the African gray parrot, which has the intelligence of a 3-year-old child. The parrot can identify colors and shapes, and of course we know that these birds can talk, that many of them can talk. In the New York Times 2001, a study of rats shows that they dream of their days in the mazes, and they can tell this by studying the patterns of their brains as they sleep and they dream, which replicate the patterns of their brains as they run through mazes. So more and more theories are that animals actually can think and reason, and those of us who have cats know that animals are very smart, and they can open doors and they can figure things out, and they have all kinds of ways of using reason, so that men are not necessarily alone in being reasoning human beings. Okay, here are some more animals. Humans appeared in the Pleistocene era 4 or 5 million years ago, and human beings could depend on intelligence and not brute strength. And human beings adapted to new conditions and modified those conditions. And this is the secret of man's unchallenged dominance. And one of the reasons for human success is that humans are generalists. They're not specialized. They never adapted exclusively to any one environment. There's probably no missing link between the man and the hominids or the apes, but a succession of man-like ancestors who used simple stone tools and weapons, found tools. But man is not the only one who used found tools. Chimpanzees, for example, if you observe chimpanzees, they will pick up a stick and use it like a tool. They will pick up a rock and hammer with it, and they will use a tool to get a stick to get ants out of an anthole, for example. So men are not the only beings that use tools, but other animals do too. Australopithecus lived in East and South Africa 2.5 million years ago, or according to more recent theories, 4 or 5 million years ago. Again, these dates are constantly being pushed back. Australopithecus had a pelvis and a leg like modern man, and he stood erect. He had a brain, though, 1/3 of the size of modern man, and thus he had a low level of speech and tool-making. There was interaction between the development of the brain and speech and tool-making, but the newest theory is that man possesses a language gene, and the newest scientific study has been that this gene appeared in a sudden mutation about 50,000 years ago, and that there was a very sudden spurt ahead in man's development due to the development of language, and that it's genetic. This is the latest thinking on that. It used to be thought that man was limited to the warm African savannas, but the recent finds in Burma suggest that man was also in Asia in the warm jungles and the primeval forests. Homo erectus was the next human being to appear, and he appeared 1/2 million years ago. Homo erectus then replaced Australopithecus because he had a larger brain. He had a brain 2/3 the size of modern man, and he used the first generalized stone tool, and it is a design tool. I'm going to show you a picture of it in a minute. It's not just picking up a rock and pounding with it. It's not just picking up a stick and banging or reaching for things with it. It's an actual designed tool. And he also developed the use of fire. He conquered the use of fire. So we have the first hatchet. Okay. I'm going to go ahead for a minute and then I'll come back. This is a design tool, and you can see that it has a particular shape, and there are hundreds and hundreds of these tools that all have this same shape, and you can see it is chipped to be that specific shape. Now, look at this tool. How would you hold it? If you were going to pick it up, how would you grab it? Yeah.
You would grab it kind of with the cone point down.
How would you grab? I can't hear you.
You would hold it with the cone point down.
You would hold it with the point down. You would grab it at the top. It's got a kind of handle there where your hand can go on it at the very top.
No, you kind of hold it more like a snow cone.
You could hold it like a snow cone? Yeah, you could hold it like a snow cone too. Okay. I would grab it from the top. But that's because of what you could think of what you could do with this tool. If you had this tool, what could you do with it?
Nuts, like walnuts or,
Okay, you could craft nuts. Anything else you could do with this? You could use it as a weapon to do what? Kill people? How would you use it as a weapon? I mean, you would
put it together on a stick?
No, they didn't use sticks. That's too early for sticks. This is the first tool. The first tool, and it has this shape. What can you do with this tool? If you were alone in the jungle and you had this tool, what would you do with it to survive? Yeah.
You would use it to dig for tubers or roots.
You could use it to dig. Okay, you could hold it at the top by that handle and you could dig with it. What else could you do with it? You could cut with it. Turn it on its side and you could cut with it. Okay, what else can you do? Think creatively. It's not just a rock, it's a tool. You could chop with it. You could chop. Okay, like chopping a tree, chopping a limb. You could turn it on its point and you could drill with it. Okay? Anything else you could think of that you could do with it? Yeah.
You could crush things within like berries or something to get juices out.
You could crush things with it, yeah, okay. It's an incredibly ingenious tool. Think of it as an axe to chop things. Think of it as a knife to cut things. Think of it as a drill to drill holes with it by twisting it. It's an extremely ingenious tool, and they knew it was, they designed it. I mean, it's not just an accident. They deliberately shaped it in this way because it had so many different uses. Okay, I want to go back to this. So this is the first design tool. And Homo erectus had a brain 2/3 the size of modern man. And, okay. Oh, I forgot to tell another thing. You could scrape with it. I'll go back to the tool. You could scrape with it. You could scrape animal skins. You could scrape back and forth with it. Okay. Now, also fire. They developed fire. So fire is very important. Before we get to fire, let's look at the theory of Lucy, the common ancestor of man. And any of you who have looked at the Houston Chronicle, you know that Lucy is coming to the Museum of Natural History. There's going to be an exhibit of the Lucy skeleton, and she is thought to be the common ancestor of man. She's the first skeletal remains of anyone who is more complete and the ancestor of modern man. So you might want to go see her. But the effectiveness of this design tool is testified to by the huge skeletal remains of large slaughtered animals, and this means that these Homo erectus who developed this design tool had social organization. And because we have evidence of the killing of large animals, it means they worked together. They had social organization, group hunting in order to capture these large-scale animals, this large-scale game. So there's efficient group organization and action and speech communication among Homo erectus. There's another evidence of social life, and that is the evidence of ritual burial among these people, and evidence of the dawn of the decorative sense, because there are beads, teeth, and shells that are carved. And so here we see the signs of the development of human beings. But most important of all, there's signs of fire making. Okay, Homo erectus discovered fire. Now, what can you do with fire that you can't do without it? Think creatively. What can you do with fire? You can cook with fire. Why is cooking an advantage? Use your mic. Why is cooking an advantage? What advantage does cooking give you?
You make food and you eat.
Well, why is cooked food better than raw food?
Not as much risk for bacteria.
Okay, press your mic and say that again.
So, not as much of a risk for infection or bacteria being spread.
Cooking kills germs, right? So, and also keeps food from spoiling, so that when you cook food, it's healthier. You can preserve it better. That means you have more to eat, because instead of if you kill a rabbit and you can only eat a certain portion of it and the rest goes to waste, well, if you cook it, it will keep longer and you can use it better. So cooking improves the amount of food. Now think for a minute about wheat, for example. I mean, they're not planting wheat, but they're gathering wild wheat. Have any of you seen raw wheat as it comes off the stalk? It's hard. You can't chew it. I mean, raw wheat and raw rice and raw grain is inedible. I mean, I guess you could eat it if you were starving. But if you cook it, you can eat it. So cooking makes a lot more food available, and it's better food. It's more edible when you have the food available. Okay. What else can you do with fire? Cooking is the obvious thing, yeah?
You can see at night.
Yes, you can see at night. When the sun goes down, you can light the fire and you can sit around the fire and you can talk to each other. And what else does that fire do that you sit around the fire?
You can shed away predators.
You can scare away predators. You have the protection of having the light.
Provides heat.
Provides heat. And heat is very important because heat controls the environment. Why is heat important? Because you can move from the warm areas to cold areas. If you have fire, you can move into colder areas. That gives you more land that you have access to because you can move out of the warm savannas. So that the heat element of fire is very important. It gives you control over your environment. What else can you do with fire? Yeah.
You can use it to herd animals.
You can what?
Use it to herd animals.
You can herd animals, yes. You can use it as a tool to herd animals if you scare animals and scare other human beings too, if you want to. Anything else you can do with fire? Anything else you can think of that you can do with fire? Mastery of, yeah, you have something?
Early metallurgy?
Probably not right away. They probably didn't think of melting things in the fire. One thing that fire can do that they discovered fairly quickly was that you could burn mud pots into pottery. So that, but that really comes a bit later. But fire gives you all kinds of technology. The thing about fire is it gives you control of your environment. You have control of your food that you can cook. You have control of the heat. You have control of the light. And this is the first step that men take in the control of their environment. And this is very important. It freed men from the supply of the energy of their own bodies. Okay, so that gives them more energy and more control. It helped them survive the ice ages because they didn't have to run away from the ice. They could build fires and survive the ice ages. It increased the available food supply because their diet was improved, and it allowed them to break out from the warm savanna into the colder regions. But most of all, it allowed control of the environment, and this is the beginning of man's success story. Okay, so this is the beginning of the journey of man's mastery of the earth. Homo sapiens appeared 220,000 years ago, and here we have a huge turning point on earth, a huge breakthrough, because Homo sapiens adapts to his environment by changing it. Instead of being a child of nature and the victim of nature, Homo sapiens begins to control nature and control his own environment. And this is the beginning of what we call culture. Culture is a man-made environment, and the story of man is the story of successive cultures. The appearance of Homo sapiens is the second major turning point in the course of events on Earth. The first major turning point was the origin of life. The second major turning point was the appearance of Homo sapiens. Before Homo sapiens, genes adapted to climate. Now this was reversed. Man adapts by changing his environment to suit his genes. The third major turning point on Earth has been reached in our lifetime. And what is the third major turning point? You all know this. Yet, now we're controlling our genes. Now man modifies genes and the environment. This is the turning point we have reached in our generation, the modification of genes. This is new. To some of you who grew up with it, it's not new, but it's new. It's very new. What dangers does this represent to the future of Earth and mankind? What is our responsibility to be involved in decision making? What is the danger of the modification of genes? It's all around us. That we can modify genes. What are the Europeans so afraid of? They call it Frankenfood. When we modify the genes in corn, for example, and grow it, then the Europeans won't buy our corn because they have modified genes. Yeah, did you have a comment?
There's more reasons for it besides the health.
Yes.
economic reasons, because the genetically modified corn doesn't regrow.
Yes.
You have to continually buy a new seed. That's part of the control of the gene, so that the seed is controlled. So it can't regrow itself.
Yeah, that's not good. That's not necessarily good. What are other dangers? There are other dangers to it as well. The Europeans are truthfully, I live in Europe in the summertime, and they're truly afraid of genetically modified food. They think it's poison.
Yeah, health reasons. Cancer causing.
Yeah. But what if we manufacture some horrible weed that kills all the corn? Some weed like kudzu that takes over all of the streams and all of the fields. What if we modify some genetically superior weed that just takes over everything? There are dangers in modifying genes. The creation of superweeds. Another new step that's been taken is cloning, and so we don't know what the effect of cloning is going to be, but our generation has the responsibility of being morally aware of the dangers of this sort of thing and morally responsible for what happens to them. There's also a great danger in genetic manipulation because of human genetic manipulation, and this is happening already. Designer babies that are being genetically planned to be supermen, super intelligent, super healthy, modifying them so they have all the best qualities according to what the parents want. This is happening already. This is very dangerous for the implications of what can happen with this. The creation of a master race, for example, there could be thoughts of that with being able to create babies, designer babies in human form. Well, this is all part of the development of man. Man, and only man, creates a made-to-order environment, and this is called culture. Culture is a man-made environment. Because only man can symbolize and envision things and concepts not in the here and now reality, he can laugh and he knows he will die. He wonders about the universe, his origin, his place in it, and in the hereafter. In short, he possesses imagination. And I've already made the argument to you that animals do have a certain quality of reasoning and intellect, but they can't imagine things, not in the here and now. And so this is one human thing that only humans can do. They can imagine things. Imagination allows humans to cope with the environment without manipulation, because a human being can imagine changing something to make it work for him. And this is the origin of culture. Culture is everything that man creates and everything that man imagines. Culture is anything not biological. Okay, what can you think of that is non-biological that's part of human culture? What is it that man can imagine and create that's not part of nature? Whatever that is culture. What?
Well, even though you said there's a religion gene, I would say religion.
Religion, I would say religion too. There may be a religion gene, a yearning for religion, but the actual religions are created by man, and religion is a culture artifact that men create. Anything else you can think of? Art is culture. Art is man-made and part of culture. What else? Yeah. Politics, government, a social system, a political system, that is man-made. It's not part of nature. Although somebody might argue about that. I don't know, if you observe apes and monkeys and chimpanzees, they have a sort of social hierarchy, but man's is more developed. Okay. Anything else you can think of that's man-made, that's not part of nature, that is part of culture? How about clothes? Clothing. Clothing is not part of nature, it's part of culture. What else?
Our technology, like computers and the internet.
Sure, technology like computers or internet or bows and arrows or axes or wheels. Technology of all kinds.
Music
definitely is part of that. Anything else you can think of? Yeah.
Stories and poetry.
Stories and poetry, yeah. I would sort of lump that under art, but it would be Yeah, that would certainly be imaginative things that is part of culture. What about language? Language. Now, most of these things I'm mentioning to you are part of every single culture. Every culture has art, it has clothing, it has tools, it has language, it has religion. But it's different. The whole set of these cultural objects are different in every single culture. They all have these things, but they're different in all of them. And so that is what makes up the cumulative set of practices that defines a culture, but it's different for every culture. Okay? The story of man is the story of successive cultures, and each culture will be different from the other one, but it will all have these same elements. Okay, does that make sense to you? That they will all have art, they will all have religion, they will all have language, they will all have storytelling, they will all have music, but each culture set will be quite different from every other culture set. These men, Homo sapiens, are us. Their brain is just like ours. Their brain is just as large as ours, and they're just as smart as we are. The difference is that they don't have 5,000 years of history behind them. We know more than they do because we have history. But they're just as smart as we are. And they just don't have the knowledge. Okay? Here's the design tool. Here is Stonehenge, made by these Stone Age men. You all know Stonehenge in England. These gigantic stones. We don't know how they raised these stones, but they're an efficient astrological observatory. They are aligned with the stars as they were in those days, the sun, moon, and stars, and they were an accurate gauge of the movements of the heavens. They were accurate. So these are smart people. This is Stonehenge. You can see how gigantic these stones are. We don't know how they put them up. We don't know what engineering they used to set these up. It's still a mystery. And they're not only in England, Stonehenge, I showed you Stonehenge, but these are more stones in France, and there are Stonehenge-like places all over Europe where these were built. Here are some more New York Times articles. The fossils may be the earliest human link. 3 to 4 million years ago, early hominids inhabited the forest and walked erect, close to the common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees. The New York Times, undated, there's an African skull 6 million years old called the Tume, vivid evidence of close human links with chimpanzees. New York Times 2002, insight into human and chimp differences comparing genes and brains. The brains differ only in size, but the brain cells operate differently. The DNA is 98.7% identical, and I don't remember what the 99.2% is figure. But the evolution of the human brain is five times faster than the chimps. Okay? Orangutans can exhibit culture. They can learn behavior, rituals, and tool use. And there are some more recent articles that I haven't written down here where gorillas have been taught language. It's more sign language rather than spoken language. But the animals, but humans are derived from animals. In the New York Times 2002, genes help identify the oldest human population. And this is through studying the genes of all human beings, all types of human beings. The Biaka Pygmies and the Kalahari people may be the most ancient people according to their genetic makeup. Some present-day Ethiopians and the Khoisans, the Krik language speakers, date back to 30,000 years ago. So historically, these are the oldest remnants of the earliest human civilization. As far as Neanderthals are concerned, they're a separate species who lived mostly in Europe and Central and Southeast Asia. They vanished 30,000 years ago, probably interbred with modern humans. And new chemical tests show they were hunters and carnivores and not scavengers, but they're a separate branch of evolution from Homo sapiens. But they appear to have interbred with Homo sapiens. Here's an interesting report. Depression was a survival tool. It helped people cope when the situation was hopeless. I guess that kind of makes sense, so that those of you who suffer from depression are surviving. In New York Times, 2001, a gene was found that underlies speech and language. This is the language gene I was telling you about. Language is acquired and generated by specific neural circuitry, not general brain function, and there was a specific genetic change 50,000 years ago, and the language gene enabled human modernity. It allowed humans to take a great leap forward into humanness by the development of this language gene. That's some of the latest research. And so here again we see this sophisticated development of Stonehenge-like cultures in Europe that show the intelligence of modern man. In the New York Times, and I think this is from 2002, geneticists track more of the earliest humans' first itineraries. 200,000 years ago, humans originated in Africa. 70 to 60,000 years ago, they exited from Africa. 50 to 40,000 years ago, they appeared in Europe, Asia, and Australia. 26,000 to 30,000 years ago, they moved to Korea, Japan, North America, and South America. Part of this evolution, part of this migration has been traced through new genetic studies. For example, geneticists have concluded that the Andaman Islanders predate the Australian Aborigines. That means a wave of humans from Africa moved into the Bay of Bengal by India before the Aborigines moved to Australia. The language ties them together in Tasmania, Papua New Guinea, and Melanesia. The first modern humans left Africa 50 to 40,000 years ago. Okay, here's tracing the human history through genetic mutations. The human family tree has 10 Adams and 18 Eves. The maternal lineages, there are 3 in Africa, 6 in Asia, 9 in Europe, and 1 diverges from Europe to America. The paternal lineages, Africa there are 3, Asia 7, Europe and Americas diverge from Asia. So the paternal lineages all come from Asia for Europe and the Americas. So genetic research is really revealing a lot more about the development of human beings. Here's a map. I've kind of reconstructed it from a New York Times map of early human migrations. I don't know if you can read those dates on there very well, but this reconstructs the movement out of Africa. The purple lines are the first ones that move outward, and then the green lines and the orange lines go later, so that you can see this migration. Okay, all of these peoples developed cultures, the culture of the food gatherers. Homo sapiens developed the blade technique, okay? Homo sapiens developed the blade technique. They take sharp flakes or blades that are struck off a core of stone. This is the development of tools to make tools. Australopithecus had 5 centimeters of cutting edge per pound of flint. Homo erectus had 100 centimeters per pound of flint, and Homo sapiens had 300 to 1,200 centimeters of cutting edge per pound of flint. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead. They developed composite tools. There was no possibility of elaborate political structures. They lived in groups of 20 to 30 people. Okay, here are some of the tools that were developed by the Stone Age men, the culture of the food gatherers. And you can see that from that generalized tool, they developed all kinds of specialized tools in the Middle Stone Age. So we see arrowheads, we see drills, we see needles, we see all kinds of specialized tools. And here is the site where those tools were actually found. This is in Asia. And here are the actual tools. That was a drawing I showed you before, but here are the tools themselves that were found at that dig. All kinds of different kinds of tools. Composite tools. This kind of a spear thrower is a composite tool. Can you think of any other composite tools? A spear with a bone or wooden handle is a composite tool. Composite tool has more than one part. What can you think of? A knife with a handle is a composite tool. What other composite tools? A spear with a handle, a knife with a handle. How about a bow and arrow? That's a composite tool. That is the most effective weapon that's been developed. It lasted clear up to 1500 AD. For thousands and thousands of years, the bow and arrow was the most effective weapon for hunting or projectiles. A sling or a spear thrower. The bow and arrow became the most formidable weapon before firearms and was used until the 14th century AD. Also, fish hooks, carved bone spearheads, spear is a composite tool, needles, belt fasteners, buttons that indicate fitted clothing were used. Okay, and here are bows and arrows and very sophisticated tools of all kinds. Okay, here's a throwing stick. Okay. But productivity was low, and the Stone Age people lived a precarious existence. There were no surpluses that set limits to the food gatherers. So here we're looking at the culture of the food gatherers. The political and social organization was very primitive. There was no possibility of elaborate political structure because it could not be supported, and there were no full-time leaders. Leaders arose to fill the needs, and so if you had an emergency, somebody jumped up and led the pack in the defense of the community, and then when the emergency was over, he melted back into the crowd. And so you have no permanent leaders, just temporary emergency leaders. Normally there were groups of 20 to 50 people, and the basic unit was the family. What tied them all together was kinship ties, duties, and rights. They practiced cooperation for food and shelter and defense. The general beliefs were ahistorical and non-revolutionary. Some people used to think that they had no wars because they had this sort of noble savage ideas of primitive people living in peace. This is absolutely not true. If we go to observe Stone Age people, they actually fought ferocious wars. They cooperated for food, shelter, and defense, and when we observe primitive cultures, they practiced human sacrifice and cannibalism. And as we go through all of these different cultures, we're going to find that this is common, that you will find human sacrifice popping up again and again and again in practically every culture. Cannibalism is not quite as common, but it is common enough. The families and bands were mutual aid societies. And how do we know about this? We look at modern Stone Age people, or we used to in the 19th and early 20th century. Now there's virtually no Stone Age culture that's untouched by civilization. But in the 19th century, the early 20th century, there were new isolated tribes that were discovered and observed, and so they observed their social organization and their culture. Probably New Guinea and the Amazon basin are the only ones where these untouched people still survive. The economic organization, there was no specialization except sex. All men and women possessed all necessary skills. Women collected fruit, nuts, grains, roots, and insects, and men caught small game and fish. As tools improved, men organized groups and killed larger animals. Women remained close to the camp to cook and care for the children and collect edibles. One theory is that men's strength and aggressiveness allowed men to become dominant at this time. Modern women historians and anthropologists disagree and think that male dominance is a product of civilization, and we'll come to that when we look at civilization. But there are two theories. Again, this debate that historians are having, they don't agree. Historically, there are groups where women actually did predominate. There's the legend of the Amazons among the Greeks, that women predominated. There's an actual tribe in Malaysia that I actually saw there, the Minangkabau, that were dominated by women. They practiced women dominated. It's one of the few female-dominated cultures surviving. The general beliefs of these hunters and gatherers were ahistorical and non-evolutionary. The future equals the past equals the present, and so they had no notion of change. They did not imagine that there was any change. They saw themselves and society as endlessly repeating the same culture. And if you have no notion that things can change, there's no criticism. Because if you have no notion that things can change, you can't criticize it. There was no real religious concepts. They were knowledgeable concerning nature because their existence depended on it, but they could give no reasonable explanation of disasters, and so they resorted to the supernatural. They used magic to persuade or fool nature. They had totems and medicine men or shamans. They were not really priests, but they were magic workers. They actually worked magic. And we still use magic today. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. But they use totems. A totem is an image of an animal, a drawn image that you could draw it on a wall. You could make it out of clay. That would be an image of an animal that they would treat as a totem, as a magic symbol, or they could replicate the animal in a dance and replicate the hunt. It's magic, and so they would try to control that animal by controlling the image. They would make the image do what they wanted the animal to do. And so this is magic, using totems and imitative dances to encourage the plant or animal to flourish and multiply, and to assure the reproduction of the group and the food supply. Okay. This is a desire to bring the supernatural under control in the beginning of art. And here are Stone Age people in Australia. These are Aborigines who live on the Stone Age level. And here are the kinds of totems. I hope you can see that well. Actually, I bought these in Australia. They're actual totems, modern versions of the totems. Here are some pictures of the kinds of totems that the Australian Aborigines use. And again, this is to control these animals through magic. Here we have the oldest art, the oldest engraved design, a kind of timeline. In South Africa, standardized tools 70,000 years ago, 40,000 yees ago in Kenya, ostrich egg jewelry, 40,000 years ago in Turkey, shell ornaments. Identify them. 40 to 30,000 years ago in Europe, cave paintings. So this is the earliest art, and these are all totems. Dance was center stage 9,000 to 5,000 years ago. Dancing was a means of social communication and also acting out totems. And again, here is the beginning of the art and the decorative sense. The medicine men or shamans or sorcerers were not a priestly caste. We have the cave paintings. Some new ones were just discovered in 1994 near Avignon in south central France. These totems do not represent a religion. There is no cohesive theology. They have no conception of gods or spirits, or a hazy conception, but they didn't really think of it. We have similar magic formulas. Can you think of any magic formulas that are very common to our society today, where we use these sort of totems and shamanistic magic? Can you think of any examples? Does anybody carry a lucky rabbit's foot? I think they're out of fashion. Yeah?
Would the Catholic saints, would they be considered totems, or?
No, they're completely different. They're not totems. They're not totems. They're part of a religion. I'm thinking of magic things like step on a crack, you break your mother's back. Okay. Do you walk under a ladder? What if you break a mirror? You have 7 years bad luck. When you spill the salt, don't you throw it over your shoulder? That's the kind of magic. Don't walk under a ladder. Watch out for black cats. Okay.
Bless you.
You say God bless you when you sneeze. Okay. Shamrocks. Do you carry a lucky shamrock? Okay. Good luck charms of all kinds. That's shamanistic magic, and we still practice it to this day. It's a desire to bring the supernatural under control, and the totems are the beginnings of art, association of the image with a desired object. So the conclusion is, in the Paleolithic age, it's vastly egalitarian. Everyone is equal in this culture. And here's some more of this decorative art, these totems that you can see. Okay. There are warm bonds of kinship. There are specific accepted obligations, rewards in the society, and there's no alienation or anxiety about the future because they have no concept of the future. They think everything's going to remain the same all the time, so there's no fear. But these bonds were very constricted. The individual was subservient to the tribe. The tribe had control of everyone. Security equals stagnation, and they were tradition-bound. They did not think of change. Okay, this all changed at the beginning of the New Stone Age. The New Stone Age began with the agricultural revolution. The Old Stone Age is Paleolithic man, and that's the Old Stone Age. The New Stone Age is Neolithic man. In the Paleolithic Age, the hunters and gatherers, man was akin to the animals. He was a hunter among hunters, dependent on and dominated by nature, and had to live in small groups. Few persons were supported per square mile. Okay, but now, with the origin of agriculture, the growing of food was an epochal discovery. It was a huge history-changing event. It initiated the Neolithic Age. Humans changed from being food collectors to food producers. But the facts were known for thousands of years. They knew that if you plant seeds, plants would grow, but they had no motivation to plant seeds. Why should they? Their life was comfortable. They could hunt, they could fish, they could gather. They were perfectly comfortable without growing foods. Why did the agricultural revolution happen? It was not sudden. The facts were known for thousands of years, but there was no incentive to change. Okay? The Paleolithic hunters controlled their population by infanticide, abortion, and lactation taboos and kept an equilibrium. The hunters had plenty to eat and plenty of leisure. The question is not why humans remain hunters and gatherers so long, but why did they change? Why did human beings change? They changed because, and also it was difficult to change because of the scarcity of domesticable plants and animals. Okay, they changed because of a period of ice ages. Okay, intervening periods of glacial ages and warm ages. The agricultural revolution was difficult because of the scarcity of domesticable plants and animals. Plants must be high-yielding and adaptable to a variety of environments. Animals must be capable of losing their instinctive flight reaction before man and must breed under care and must accept the diet provided by man. And the peoples of the old world of Asia and the Middle East had these plants and animals available to them in abundance. New findings indicate that South and Mesoamerican Indians domesticated plants and animals almost simultaneously to the Middle East in Europe. But in order for people to use them, changes had to occur which upset the comfortable equilibrium. And this happened at the end of the Pleistocene era when there was a dramatic climactic change, glacial and interglacial ages, and humans adapted to the glacial ages by growing their own food, but only in a few favored regions. Okay, here's a glacier in Switzerland, and here are the glaciers that covered Europe. the agricultural revolution, people were able to increase productivity of domesticated plants and animals until they provided a high proportion of the diet of the community. There's a recent claim that civilization is based on man's desire to brew beer because of one of the most earliest recipes that it was ever found in the earliest civilization of Mesopotamia was a recipe for beer. So somebody said, well, they just built their civilization to make beer. But probably that's not true. The agricultural revolution meant settlement in one place, and it meant food production as a way of life. Okay, this is a change from hunting and gathering. Hunters and gatherers move around a lot, and they cover a large area. The agriculturalists settle down in one spot, and they gradually spread over a large portion of the globe. As I said, there were independent revolutions in the Middle East, Mesoamerica, North China, and Southeast Asia. The most successful of these was, and arguably so, was actually in the Middle East. In the Middle East, because they had a better variety of domesticable plants and animals. The plants that they domesticated were wheat, oats, barley, and rye, and the animals were goats, sheep, cattle, and pigs. And so they had a large variety of animals and plants that were adaptable to a variety of environments. And the complex of multiple agricultural meant high production. Okay, and here are the regions where agricultural revolutions took place in these independent areas of Europe, and you can see China and the Yellow River in China, Southeast Asia, the Mesopotamian River Valley, the Nile River Valley, the area of Peru in South America, and Mesoamerica, and each of them had separate agricultural revolutions, unconnected to each other. They're independent of each other. Okay, as we mentioned, they had a good variety of plants and animals in the Middle East. We also have to mention onions, garlic, and lilies, which were developed in Egypt, which were very important to civilization. In the Americas, they developed corn, turkeys, dogs, guinea pigs, squash, peppers, manioc or cassava, beans, potatoes, and llamas. In Southeast Asia, the animals and plants they domesticated were chickens, ducks, water buffalo, and rice. The transition to agriculture was very gradual and prolonged. In the Middle East, it happened from 9,500 to 7,500 BC, and from these centers that you see on the map, it spread throughout the entire world. There was diffusion of agriculture from slash and burn farming through budding off. Okay, they would slash and burn, they would burn their fields and farm it until the land was worn out, and then they would move to a new place and burn the lands again. And when the population grew too large, their children would go out and practice slash and burn. Diffusion led to increased diversification of crops and techniques and ways of living. Slash and burn farming was semi-settled and spread through budding off. But then a new type of culture arose. This is nomadism. Okay, nomadism is different. It's not Stone Age hunting and gathering where you move around, but it's a lifestyle based on animal raising and animal herding. And it's called nomadism because they herd their animals from the summer grazing lands to the winter grazing lands. It's not so much that they move around, it's that they herd animals. It's a technical term. And this required extensive grazing lands. Nomadism developed from 1500 to 1000 BC. The third type of agricultural revolution was permanent irrigation agriculture, and this was permanent, where you could stay in one place virtually forever. This happened in the Nile and Tigris-Euphrates river valleys, in the Yangtze River in China, the Mekong River in Southeast Asia, and in Mesoamerica, where there were no rivers. But it was these places where you could stay virtually forever through the technology of irrigation that generated the material human resources for civilization. And this is where civilization begins, in these places where you could live permanently for hundreds and thousands of years and not move. Okay, here's the migrations from the agricultural centers. Let's go back to that map. Here's where the centers are. You can see the yellow spots where each of the agricultural revolutions happened. And here you see the spread from those centers, where they spread out from each of those areas. And we'll come back to these later. Okay. And here are nomads. Okay, remember that nomads herd animals. In this case, they're herding camels. Okay. And here, again, a caravan. And nomads tend to be traders as well, because they travel from place to place. And here they are herding sheep. Nomads herding sheep. Okay. The culture of the food producers. Okay. Diffusion led to the diversity. Where am I? Okay, I've done that. The culture of the food producers. They lived in a new sedentary existence. The Neolithic village was a basic economic and cultural unit. Everyone had to work and work hard, men, women, and children. Famine was common and malnutrition was the rule. And there were many academics from poor sanitation and group living. Life expectancy was exceedingly low. But they were living in these villages, and they were semi-permanent or permanent places to live. What are the advantages of village life? What can you do if you live in a village that you can't do if you don't live in a village? Yeah.
You can have more children, because if you're moving around less, it's easier to just have more children.
You can have more children, and they had problems with overpopulation. I mean, the bad side of that. They could have more children. What else can you do in a village that you can't do?
There's a sense of security because you're surrounded by, people and they're really close to you.
You have a sense of security. But what do you have in the village that you don't have if you're not in the village? Yeah.
Man-made shelter?
Yes, man-made shelters. They can build houses. Okay? They can build houses in a village. If you're moving around as a hunter-gatherer, you never build a house. You live in a tree. You live in a cave. But you can actually build houses. I'm going to go follow that line of thought. What else can you have in a village? You have houses. What can you put in those houses? You put furniture in those houses. You can have furniture. You can have possessions. You can't have possessions if you're traveling all the time. If you're hunting and gathering and you're traveling all the time. What else do you have to have in a village where you're growing crops? What do you have to have? It's late. You're all tired. I'm not thinking.
Did the social institution brew up from that?
Yes, they do build social institutions, and they build primitive governments. They start building governments so you can have social and political institutions. But what if you're growing lots and lots of grain and lots of food? What are you going to do with it?
Storage houses.
You have to have storage houses. You have to put containers. You have to have containers to put this food in. So you invent pottery, and you make your containers out of mud, right? So you have pottery. So they invent pottery. And so they have all kinds of technological innovations. Pottery was invented, firing techniques and kilns and glazes, furnishings, knickknacks of various kinds. Also, construction, buildings, houses, and furniture. Textiles are invented for the first time, flax and cotton and hemp. You don't want to wear animal skins in a really hot climate, right? So you want to have cotton and you want to have flax. The tribal and political structure grows for the first time. Powerful chiefs, social classes, nobility, and commoners grow for the first time. The basic social unit is the household and the extended family, okay? Here's the technological process. The basic unit is the household, and it's egalitarian. But new life means new gods, and for the first time you see real religion. What kind of new gods are you going to have if you're growing food and staying in one place? What kind of gods are you going to have?
sun gods and rain gods?
Sun gods, rain gods, fertility gods. This is the first religion in the Stone Age cultures, in the new Stone Age cultures. And so they have the new gods of fertility gods. Here's the plan of the remains of a late Stone Age hut. And so they're building these for the first time. This is a Stone Age lake village in Switzerland on the lake. It's a Stone Age village. Here's pottery that's invented. Interestingly, as soon as farming was invented, malaria developed. And so the latest genetic studies show that malaria began with the advent of farming. DNA changes related to settled agriculture 8,000 years ago. Okay. The worldview was the future was a reproduction of the past, and there's no conception of change. But there was a huge population explosion. And I mentioned the religion, the goddess of fertility was the most common. Myths arose to explain the origins of crops. The ancestors of the people were goddesses or gods. And myths were the typical prehistoric way of explanation. The worldview was that the future was the reproduction of the past, and there was no conception of change. Children were trained to do as their fathers and mothers did. But agriculture generated a great population explosion. There was a 25-fold increase within 8,000 years. 1,000,000 years ago, there were 125,000 people in the whole world. 10,000 years ago, there were 5.32 million Homo sapiens hunters. But 2,000 years ago, at the end of the agricultural revolution, there were 133 million people in the world. So the agricultural revolution generated a huge population explosion. Peoples that led in technological innovation also led in numerical growth. Technology meant increased production. Agriculturalists displaced the hunters by budding off, usually by intermarriage with neighboring hunters. Thus, the agricultural techniques and the crops were transmitted. By 1000 A.D., the hunters were only 1% of the world population. In 9000 B.C., the hunters had been 100% of the world population. These were the conditions under which civilization began, and it began with settled irrigation agriculture in the culture of the new Stone Age Stone Age villages. We're now ready to turn to the beginnings of civilization, and that's what we'll do next time. Okay, we have 5 minutes for questions. Questions, comments? You're exhausted. Yeah, questions? You press your mic.
Study on the religion gene, it's actually called the God gene.
The God gene.
Yes, yeah. And it's actually not, a gene that predisposes you to, believe in God. It's a spirituality aspect of human beings, and it lets you, it pushes you forward, and everyone seems to have that, but you don't have to develop it. Kind of like the homosexuality gene right now. They're studying that homosexuals are innately predisposed to have that culture origin.
Yeah, you're more correct. It's a spirituality gene, but the point is that human beings are genetically disposed toward religion. I mean, they can develop that religion. And there are people who go farther than saying it's just a spirituality gene, but it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And as we look at these different cultures, we're going to see that every single one of them has very strong religious beliefs and a very strong religious tendency. In the first civilizations, religion dominates everything. We're going to see that in all these civilizations. Each religion is different, but it's totally dominant in each one of the cultures we're going to look at.
Is that what Durkheim talked about in his elementary forms of religious life? Is that what he was...
I'm not aware of that. Anyway, it's very interesting. Okay, any more questions or comments? Okay, next week we'll look at the first Middle Eastern civilizations, Mesopotamia and Egypt. Okay, go on the website, get the notes, do your reading.